Okay, so welcome to the first part in the first series on Unreal Engine 4 Master Material creation, and this is the Master Materials for Beginner series, and it's divided into 5 parts. In this first part, we're going to discuss some basic new project and scene setup. If you feel comfortable with your knowledge on that, you can go ahead and skip to part 2, where we'll go ahead and start talking about the base color. In this part, we're going to talk about how to set up a new first-person project using the in-engine default for first-person blueprint system. And this way we can drop in and walk around if we'd like to. We're also going to talk about how to set up a extremely basic lighting environment for material testing. That will just include a few basic things like light mass important volumes, sphere reflection captures to get some decent reflections happening, a directional light for the skylight, and an actual skylight. We'll discuss throughout the videos some basic navigations and hotkeys for the editor, as well as how to save files. We'll do a basic lighting bake. Again, nothing complex, just enough to be able to preview our material for now. We'll create some folders inside the content browser for clean and easy navigation within the engine. We'll go ahead and create our blank basic material, so if you skip forward, make sure that you know you have to go ahead and create a blank material to be working within. Nothing special there. And then we'll also talk about how to apply materials and material instances using material elements within the engine. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move forward to part 1. Okay, so in this first video, we're going to talk a little bit about setting up a new scene with some blueprints for moving around and just kind of putting some props on the level so that we can see what we're doing as we're updating and iterating on our material. And this is going to be a fairly quick process. So let's go ahead and start here with a new project. So I've launched the material, the material out of the Unreal Project browser, and I'm under New Project. And what we want to do is scroll down a little bit, and actually, it's actually right here at the top, Blueprint First Person. I'm just going to left click that, and we're just going to call this Material Tutorials. And we'll come down here, I'm going to say, and we do want to check mark this include starter content, because this is going to come in really handy when we're just kind of testing textures and so on and so forth. So let's create project. Okay, and so that brings up the example map, which comes with every project when you start it up, and you can see right here first person template. And what that means is we have a player start point, and basically we can just drop down and we have a first person template available for us to walk around and just kind of quickly preview our scene, which is nice. But what we want to do is we want to go up here to file and say new level, and we just want to pick the default level, and that gives us a nice clean kind of empty scene with the basic static mesh here, and we have some basic components set up. So we have a light source, which is a directional light, which is kind of acting as the sun right now, and we have some atmospheric fog in the scene as well, and then we have that player start again, and then we of course have the sky sphere itself, which is giving us a nice backdrop. The static mesh template map floor is the actor that we have in the scene right now, and that's a great base to start with. First thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and create ourselves a new folder. So over here in the content browser, underneath the game folder right here, and this acts a lot like Windows Explorer, we're just going to either right click and say new folder, or we can hit the drop down menu up here and say new folder. I'm just going to right click, and we're going to call this Material Tutorial. Hit enter. You can call yours what you like, and that gives us a new empty folder to work with. And so let's go ahead and set up this scene the way we want it now that we have our folder in place. One of the first things I want to do is add another prop. So materials can be kind of hard to see the definition when they're on a flat surface. So let's go ahead and add something with a little bit more interesting characteristics so that we can see the effects of our material as we iterate on it a little bit better. So right here underneath the props folder, if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a static mesh, or rather SM underscore material preview mesh 02. I'm going to drag this into the scene by just left click, drag and drop. Alright, and the way I'm navigating is Alt left mouse button. So oftentimes I'm a big Maya user, so coming from there I will find my mesh in the scene, I'll hit F to frame up on it, and I'll use Alt right mouse click to zoom in and out, and Alt left to kind of pan around. Okay, so now that we have that in the scene, let's go ahead and create our new material. So over here in the content browser again, let's find our material tutorial folder. We want to create a new material. So again, we could go up here to new, we could hit material here, we could scroll down to the material and textures tab and hit material there, or we could just right click inside the folder and do the same thing. So material, and I'm just going to keep the traditional naming convention that they use, so it's capital M underscore, and I'm just going to call this material tutorial, and that creates a brand new blank material. Okay, and we can see that there's nothing happening with it because we haven't given it any instructions, but the first thing we want to do is go ahead and make sure we have it applied to everything in the scene. And there's a couple of ways we could do this. So I'm going to click on our static mesh template floor, and if we look over here inside the details panel, we can see element 0, and basically what that is that's a housing for the material. So when you import a mesh, depending on how many different materials you have assigned to the mesh, even if it is one single mesh, Unreal Engine understands that and it separates it by what's called elements. So in this case we only have one. So we could just drag and drop the material, left mouse click drag, and drop it here. That's one way to do it. Okay, but I'm not going to do that. Or we could, if we want to be more accurate, and in this case there's only one, but in future cases it will be useful to know that we could just simply come over here and there's a white arrow that says use selected asset from content browser. And this is the theme that carries all the way through the engine, but we're going to go ahead and select this and then hit the white arrow and we'll see it update. Now it's kind of, there we go, a little bit more apparent now that the black material showed up. Okay, so let's select this and do the same thing, except for on this one, we can see that there are actually two material elements. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate what I was speaking to earlier. Let's drag and drop this on there, and what you can see is it only did part of the mesh, and that's because they have a different material assigned to the other part. So we drag and drop, and let's go ahead and grab this one and fill that in as well. Okay, great. So now that we have our basic scene set up with our material, let's talk about lighting real quick. We want to make sure we have a good lighting environment, kind of something a little bit neutral and natural, just to preview in for right now. I want to go ahead and grab this the player start. I want to move it out of the way, and I'm just selecting that up here in the scene outliner. Just in case we do start, we don't want to be starting kind of colliding with that mesh. Okay, so let's talk about lighting real quick. We have our light source in the scene, and that's fine, and that's exactly what we want, but we want to kind of elaborate on this just a little bit. So the first thing that comes to mind is what's called a skylight, and what that does is it kind of simulates a bounce light from the sky, and it kind of pulls the color and the brightness from there, and it kind of bounces light on the ground, and so we can do that easily just by going to lights, and here it is right here, skylight. I'm going to left click drag that into the scene, and immediately when I pull that into the scene you can see that light hitting the surface down there. Okay, so that's something nice to have. The other thing that we want to do is called a sphere reflection capture. So over here under visual, here it is right here, sphere reflection capture. We're going to left click drag this onto the scene as well, and basically what this does is going to help us simulate our reflections. Okay, so we're not going to get too much into that right now. We're just going to leave it as it is, and we're going to move forward. But basically a lot of engines use this kind of technique now, where it kind of grabs pixel information, lighting information from the surrounding environment, and then casts it onto everything around it. So the last thing that we need to do is set up what's called a light mask important volume, and that's just going to give us a more specific area to bake in, so the engine understands that this is what we want to bake, and not to worry about everything else, and that'll give us a cleaner, better result as well. So if we go over here under volumes, we're going to scroll down to light mass important volume, and we're going to drop that in the scene, and we're just going to scale this up just a little bit. All right, scale it up a little this way, and make sure we're covering our bases all the way around, and not too much further outside of it. So we can actually go up here to this perspective button up here, and we can say top, and we could view this from the top down if we wanted to, because you can see I've actually expanded it too far. And then we can go to the side, and we can move it up a little bit. There we go, and just house everything that we have in there just to be nice and clean. And we will go back to perspective. Alright, now select that and hit F. Alright, so now that we have all this stuff in the scene, it's a little bit distracting, at least when we're not working on that stuff. So if we actually hit G on the keyboard, we can free up some screen real estate and get a cleaner preview. And if we wanted to do that one step farther, we can actually hit F11, and that will give us a full screen preview. Okay, great. So we're almost done here. There's only a couple more things we want to talk about real quick, so I'll hit F11 to go back out of full screen. First thing we want to do is bake the lights. Okay, so now that we have our lighting environment set up, let's go ahead and get a bake, just a quick bake. And so it's up underneath the build button, and if you use this drop down menu, there's a couple of things that we want to look at. First is the lighting quality. It should be set to preview by default, and that's all we really want for right now. We will talk about a production bake in a little while. And the second is that we only want to build the lighting. We don't want to just go up there and hit the build button. We don't have any gameplay elements in the scene to build. And we don't even want to waste time calculating or thinking about it. We just want to build lighting only. So I'm just going to hit that real quick. Okay, and a quick pause there while it baked, and it is done now. And so it's kind of hard to see because everything is black, but we are getting a really nice bounced light from the ground now, and that kind of cleaned everything up just a little bit. And we'll talk about techniques to improve this lighting environment and to kind of improve the resolution of these maps a little bit later on, but for right now this is going to do exactly what we need it to do. And finally, before we move on, the last thing I want to talk about is saving. So in this engine, everything that you make needs to be saved kind of separately, or you can save it all together, but every material instance, the scene itself, anything you import does need to be saved. And we can tell that it needs to be saved because it has this little asterisk in the bottom left hand corner of the icon inside of the content browser. And basically what it's telling us is you've modified it, you've made changes, and you haven't saved it. So what we could do is we could right click here and we could go down and hit save. Okay. Or we can just go up to File and hit Save All. Alright, that's what I'm going to do. And because we haven't actually named our map, we're going to go ahead and it's going to ask us for that. So I'm going to go inside the Maps folder, and as everything else is titled, we will call this Map Tutorial. Material Tutorial, sorry. Save that. And now if we were to hit File, Save All, okay, it's just going to save everything. It's not going to ask us any more questions. Okay, great. So with all of that wrapped up, let's go ahead and move on to the next tutorial where we'll start creating our master material.